Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome to another episode of Sree's daily global COVID-19 show. It's my honor to convene this daily conversation around all things COVID-19. We go pretty far from our original mission, talking only about COVID, but we do spend our time discussing three aspects of this crisis: the health, financial, and inequality parts of the crisis. We're always looking for guests and suggestions. Sree@sree.net is my email address. Today is episode 177. That's right, we've been on air for 177 days in a row, and our 180th episode, or 6-month episode, is coming up on Sunday. Today, we have a very special guest with us and a very special topic. How about this? Learning from philosophers. Eric Weiner is with us, the author of the Socrates Express, In Search of Life Lessons from Dead Philosophers, the best-selling author of the Geography of Bliss. His books have been translated into more than 20 languages. He is an awesome interview, I know, because I've interviewed him before, and you will love meeting him and learning from him. And I've been waiting to talk to him throughout this pandemic, and I'm so excited to have him on here. You'll meet him in just a minute. First, let me say hello, everybody. Hi, I'm Sree, and I'm the Marshall Loeb Visiting Professor of Digital Innovation at Stony Brook School of Journalism and the co-founder of Digimentors, a social, digital, and virtual events consulting business. I tell folks, don't cancel your event without talking to us. Don't even plan your virtual event without getting in touch with us first. My email address is right there, Sree@sree.net. We love geeking out on virtual events. We've done events for 50 people and 100,000 people. I bet your event is somewhere in between. When people think this is my job, this is an ad for my job. We'd love to build you a virtual event or build you a talk show like this. If you'd like to do one, get in touch. We can talk about it. We are so grateful to all of you for being here. Well, let's tell you a little bit about the show. In the first 165 episodes, we had more than 1 million viewers, 122 million social impressions, more than 300 guests, 175 of them women. We're going to up that ratio. Guests from 62 cities, 16 countries, including the chief scientist of the World Health Organization. And we can do this because of our friends at Scroll.in and Scroll Global. Please check them out. And please check out our archives, youtube.com/SreeNet, and our producers, Rose Horowitz at Rose Horowitz 31 and Vandana Menon, Vandana_Menon. We're also very grateful to our sponsors, who we will thank in just a few minutes. But first, we want to give you a chance to meet my friend Eric. You're going to learn a lot from him. We're going to have a great time together. Please tag your friends right now. We're live on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, and on LinkedIn. And your friends can watch now or later as soon as we're off the air. So with that, please say hello to Eric. Hi.
Hey, Sree, good to see you.
Good to see you. The last time we did this, I was doing a podcast for CBS, and it was on. It was several years ago, and it was all on the radio on in a studio, down in Midtown Manhattan that I was on. You were on the phone. Here I am now, constrained to this little, I think it's about 8 square feet of my apartment where I'm allowed to function. Everything else, my wife and the twins, who are 17, are all in charge of the rest of the house and the dog. So this is my studio.
Do they let you out sometimes, occasionally, for for food and water?
I should say I'm really blessed because all 3 of the other humans in the house love to cook. So a plate of food to arrive. It's a way to keep me
arriving.
Here. They just keep me here. But I do want to start all our shows. We ask, how are you? Where are you? And how did you and your family manage through the pandemic?
Let me start with where I am. I am in the beautiful little town of Silver Spring, Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C. How am I? I am contemplative, I would say, which, as we're going to discuss, I would argue is a good way to be. And my wife and teenage daughter and dog and 2 cats are all just outside that door. And we have weathered the pandemic fairly well, knock wood, so far. And, just a little bit of claustrophobia is all we've suffered. And so I count us among the lucky ones there.
And I'm so glad to hear you're okay. Over my shoulder, you see your book right here, The Socrates Express. The other book you see, You Next, was our guest last night, Antonio Johnson. It was fantastic, talking about the culture of Black barber shops. And everyone who didn't get a chance to see it, please go back and watch and find all my archives on youtube.com/SreeNet. And please follow Eric. He's on Twitter, Eric_Weiner. And you can pronounce the name in many ways, but he says there's an easy way to remember how to pronounce his name.
Somebody who whines a lot and likes to drink wine, I would say.
And that covers you pretty well, right?
Pretty much the whole spectrum there, Sree, right there.
That's great. So let's talk about this book. It is In Search of Life's Lessons from Dead Philosophers. Tell us how you decided to write this book. We'll also talk about the Geography of Bliss, an awesome book that did so well. Also what it's like to publish during the pandemic. So we'll cover all those topics, but let's start with what is the meaning, not of life, but of this book.
Well, it started with this gadget, actually. My iPhone XS, whatever, my iThing. And I picked it up and I realized that it's a miracle on the one hand, because with the swipe of a finger, I can access all of human knowledge pretty much, from the ancient Egyptians to theoretical physics. And if you think about it, this is incredible. Never before in human history has the average person, someone like me or you, had this thing we carry around in our pocket that gives us access to this unprecedented amount of information and knowledge, really. Yet are we happier? And if we're not, what's lacking in our life, and what is lacking in this gadget? And I think the answer is wisdom. And there's a difference between information and knowledge and wisdom. Information is just sort of raw bits of data, right? Knowledge is a more organized structure of these information bits. But wisdom is something different. Wisdom is not a what or a why, it's a how. It's how to live our lives, what to do with the knowledge. There was a British musician named Miles Kington who said the difference between knowledge and wisdom is knowledge is knowing that the tomato is a fruit, and wisdom is not putting it in fruit salad. And we are knowledgeable, but we're not very wise. And it turns out there's this untapped source of really just great wisdom out there. And it's called philosophy, which means literally love of wisdom. That's where the ancient Greek word philosophos means. That's where it comes from. And I'm hoping that this book will change people's minds about philosophy, that it's not some difficult, arcane subject that you're going to flunk out of in college, that it's actually a great way to teach you not what to think, but how to think.
And why did you call it Socrates? You had many options of philosophers. Talk about that.
Yeah, so Socrates is a sort of stand-in for all of philosophy. He was not the first philosopher. Many came before him, but we now call them pre-Socratics. But he was the first one to really ask a different kind of question. Not, what is the nature of reality, or why is there something rather than nothing? But again, that how question. How can we lead richer, more meaningful lives? How can we be better people? Socrates, it's been said, was the first person to call philosophy down from the heavens and introduce it into people's homes. So he's sort of the patron saint of philosophy and the first martyr, because he was killed by his fellow Athenians on trumped-up charges, which is often the case. Really, what he was guilty of was asking people a lot of pesky, annoying questions, and they didn't like that back then any more than we like it today, and they put him to death for that reason. But he really pushed people's buttons, because he would come to you, Sree, and he would say, why are you wearing that shirt? And you would say, well, because I like that shirt. It's my favorite shirt. But do you really know why? Is there, it looks a bit like a kurta. Is it because of your Indian heritage? Is it because it's the only clean shirt you have? He would really probe you on this question. And he would also force you to sort of interrogate yourself and your own motivation. Maybe I'm just wearing this shirt because I think it projects a certain image, but have I really thought this through? And so Socrates really believed that we sort of stumble half blind through life, with all of these assumptions about who we are and how we're living our lives without stopping to question them. And that to me is what philosophy is at its best. It's to pause, to stop, and to ask questions of yourself.
Love it. And one of the things, of course, is the Socratic method that you just described. And
Okay.
when I went to journalism school at Columbia and then I
Mhm.
taught there for 20 years, Fred Friendly, the legendary American journalist and television executive producer who worked with the even more legendary Edward R. Murrow, used to do these Socratic method style conversations and pushing
Mhm.
people.
Right.
And it was the work that he was doing and that style, was it known as the Socratic method then itself? Was he recognized in his own
Probably. It's been around for 2,500 years. So unless you were in journalism school more than 2,500 years ago, it is the Socratic method. And that's the thing. And one of the key differences between knowledge and wisdom is that knowledge is perishable, right? We don't study the ancient Greeks for their pharmacology or their technology, really. You don't want to be doing that because we've moved on. But when it comes to wisdom, the how of life, um, the ancient Greeks and other philosophers, there's some 14 in my book. They're much closer and more relevant than we think, because wisdom is portable. It transcends space and time. So just this is a show about partly about COVID and what we're living through. We think we're living through unprecedented times, but we're not really. I mean, humans have come before us who have lived through pandemics and epidemics and plagues, much worse than this, actually. And they've thought about how to react to it and what to do about it and how to endure it. And I think we'd be foolish to ignore that wisdom.
Thank you. Before we take a break and do what we call our world tour of people watching from around the world, they're commenting right now, telling us where they're watching from. They're also sharing the show with their friends and family. You'll also hear at some point how, or we'll hear from Eric about living in India, in Delhi in the 1990s, a very different India, as he told me. One of the things that I want to talk to you about and why I've been wanting to have you on the show is to think about how the world isn't exactly what we had thought it would be during a true pandemic. And what I mean by that is every movie, every novel about a dystopian future has two things missing from it that we have today: the internet and electricity, right? And the food chain, the food supply, things like that. Uh, is it something about the imagination of writers and philosophers and everybody else that they always presume that when bad stuff happens, it has to be like that and not the way it is now? I, of course, much prefer this than a Planet of the Apes and all those other movies.
No, that's an interesting. I've never heard this raised. This is an interesting question. I mean, I think as humans, we're pretty bad at predicting the future, right? We don't make room for the unforeseen. So, for instance, in 1900, there was a survey done of the city of New York that predicted by the year 1945, Manhattan would be under 6 feet of horse manure because they had not foreseen the advent of the automobile. Um, so there wouldn't be this growth in horse-drawn carriages. So we tend to assume that the future will be just like the present, only more so. We tend to take we have I think, a weirdly schizophrenic view of the future, in that we see it as sort of better than today and yet worse at the same time. The technology will be better, but we don't see human nature changing the way we see technology changing. If you look at all these futuristic novels and movies, and you even just think about the word the future, what do you think of? You tend to think of technology, the Jetsons and flying cars and all that. But do you think about the kind of subjects I write about in my book, about wisdom, about, will people love differently? Will they be kinder to each other? Will they see more beauty in the world? We don't imagine the future that way. We only imagine it in terms of changed technology. And I think that's a blind spot that we have.
What can people find at Eric Weiner's website, Eric Weiner Books, all one word.com? What else is on here? Obviously, your books, but what else?
Oh, there's a Q&A with me. There's some of the articles I've written. And there's a photo. If you go to actually the main page, the home page, you will see a photo, which I love, which is taken by a great photographer in Bulgaria, because that is in Bulgaria. And I love that photo. I'm standing alongside my publisher, a great man named Nico Genchev. And for some reason, Sree, my books are very popular in two countries, Indonesia and Bulgaria. And so my Nico said, you have to come to Bulgaria. I came there. They granted me an honorary PhD from a university there. I met the foreign minister. And I like to think that everyone's famous in a different country. And my country is Bulgaria. What's yours, Sree?
These 8 feet, these 8 squares.
That 8 feet, you've got that space.
Yeah, I own this space until my wife needs to get something from the bureau here. So that's what
right. So that's a picture of Bulgaria, and I teach writing workshops twice a year. Once, usually in Kathmandu, with my friend James Hopkins. This year, we're going online with the writing workshops. Hope to be back in the Himalayas next year. And yeah, I have a certain fondness and soft spot for South Asia, having lived there and spent a lot of time there.
And that is a very special part of the world for so many of us. And we're so glad that we can talk about that with Eric in just a few minutes. We are going to do our global tour, but first we're going to thank our sponsors. And Eric, there's also a chance for you to catch your breath and also make sure you're shared on Twitter. And if you're going to your Facebook, I'm sure people are responding there now, and you can say hello there as well. So we'll give you a chance to do that. Folks, you're listening to my interview with Eric Weiner. Here is his book, The Socrates Express, Life Lessons from Dead Philosophers. We're going to talk about the philosophers in his book, including Socrates, of course, but Rousseau and Gandhi and others. So please stay tuned. First, we must thank our sponsors who make this show possible. We have so many that supported us, and now we're on we're getting ready for 180th episode. That means 6 months of this show. So please thank our sponsors as we say hello to Muckrack Academy, which helped me put together fundamentals of social media for journalists, PR pros, and everyone. Free certification available, and that means anybody can take this course, mrac.co/social, mrac.co/social, and you get a free certificate. More than 4,000 people have done the course, so should you. Nunbelievable.com, divinely delicious cookies on a mission. Each handcrafted cookie provides a meal to those in need. One cookie equals one meal, 20% off with the code SREE, SREE. We also want to thank our friend Charles Carroll and his book, The Inventor in You, a step-by-step guide to your first invention. And Charles is the developer of more than 80 patents. His Twitter handle is @InventorCharles, and guidetoinvention.com is his book. In our class that I teach at Stony Brook, we talk about innovation and invention, including during times of crisis. So please check that out. The book is called The Inventor in You, guidetoinvention.com. And our event partner, Rise or Fall Together, the One Shared World Interdependence Summit, Thursday, September 17th, a free conference, 9 a.m. to noon. Amazing speakers, including David Nabarro, the WHO Director General's Special Envoy for COVID-19, and the legendary Renee Fleming. And our company, Digimentors, is producing that show. And we want to also thank, for promotional consideration, and please check out hotstar.com/US. And we want to thank She's on Call, Sundays at 11 a.m. Eastern. She's on Call as two surgeons interviewing other doctors, Dr. Sujanak Chandrasekhar and Dr. Marina Kurian, interviewing doctors of all kinds. This past week, they had a colon surgeon talking about Chadwick Boseman, a rehab doctor talking about the importance of understanding that after COVID, patients have recovered. Many of them have to take great pains in COVID recovery and rehab. So, with that, let's now bring back our guest on stage. Our guest is Eric Weiner, the author of the Socrates Express, In Search of Life Lessons from Dead Philosophers. And we're just so delighted to have him here with us. We've already laughed a lot and learned a lot, and that will continue for the rest of the rest of the hour that we have together. So please welcome Eric once again onto our stage. Hi, Eric. Hope you
Hi, Sree.
catch your breath. And we want to just give you our world tour. And so as we talk about, as people say hello, please tell us if you have a memory of the place, or you've been there, or you know something about it, or we used to call it bucket list. Someone said, I don't like bucket list because, there's that death associated, so they called it a life list. And Jonathan Borstein is watching from the East Village. He's watched 177 straight episodes of this show, and we're so grateful.
I've been to the exotic East Village. I have been there. Yes.
And tell us, do you have a favorite memory of New York that?
My first date with my wife, who's in the other room listening now, was at an Indian restaurant on East 6th Street in the Village called Kismet. And Sree, I think you know what Kismet means?
Yes.
It means fate or destiny, and it was a good sign, I guess. So this is the row of Indian restaurants. Are they still there? I hope they're still there.
They survived. Yes, many are Bangladeshi now, but they're still.
They've always been Bangladeshis. Bangladeshis open a restaurant, they call it Taj Mahal immediately because it sells better. Good marketing.
Opened a casino called it Taj Mahal. So
exactly. So why can't a Bangladeshi open a restaurant called Taj Mahal? So we had our first date there. And she had an apartment on First Avenue, like a 27-story walk-up or something like that. And so I've got fond memories of the East Village. So far we're batting 100. I feel like this is a game show. I will win something at the end.
All right, let's see. Our friend Rose Horowitz is watching from Connecticut and is talking. Is going to be live tweeting and sharing what you're saying here. So I've been to Connecticut.
The great state of Connecticut. You have to say the great state of Connecticut. Okay.
Is this the is this the Republican convention?
I guess so. Yeah.
And look at this. Deborah Kerr says, "Hello, Eric. Your book arrived today. Can't wait to."
Oh, hi, Deborah. I know Deborah. Great. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, and Deborah's a regular viewer, so thank you, Deborah.
All right.
And Deborah says, "Bliss." I think she's talking about your book, The Geography of Bliss. Tell us about that book. Yeah.
That was my first book, and that was me having an existential crisis as a foreign correspondent for NPR and sort of enjoying my job, but realizing how much the work of journalists necessarily focuses on the worst of humanity. That you're getting up and you're looking for places that are bereft by war, famine, disease, and you're reporting on it. And it's important, it's necessary, but it was kind of bumming me out. So I had this epiphany one morning that what if I spent a year going around the world looking for the happiest places, and what could we learn from them, and what could I learn from them? And then my second epiphany was, what if I got NPR to pay for me to go around the world for a year? And that didn't turn out, but I wrote a book instead, and it's a good book. I think it's about the connection between happiness and place, and different flavors of happiness around the world, and how we can learn good things from other countries too, and not only the bad.
Those of us who don't pay enough attention, we think Denmark and Bhutan are high in that list of happy places.
Denmark is high, does very well. Bhutan doesn't actually do that well in these happiness surveys, but of course they had this by now famous policy of gross national happiness. The way I like to describe it is, everyone's playing by one rule of soccer, and then Bhutan comes along and changes the rules and says maybe the goal should be moved over here, right? Instead of gross national product, maybe nations should be focusing on gross national happiness. So you can change the rules of the game and not necessarily be the best at the game. And I think that's the case of Bhutan. It's a fairly happy place, but what they really stand out is by changing the way we think of What's the goal of a country? Is it to make its citizens richer or to make them happier? And this small country in the Himalayas has really changed the conversation, and I give them great credit for that.
I lived in Bhutan as a tiny kid, and it's a beautiful place. And if people get a chance, when we travel, we end up on the show talking so much about travel because everyone's remembering where they used to go. You did that when you mentioned, going back to the Himalayas for your
Yeah.
writing workshop in Kathmandu. Everybody,
I call it retrospective travel. we're looking back and we're fondling our souvenirs and we're thumbing through the photo albums, and that's okay. I think that's okay.
I lived in Moscow, and in honor of the Russian meddling, we have these Matryoshka dolls here as well. Salmia Malik is watching from India. Tell us about living in India in the 90s.
So this was during the time of Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, if anyone remembers him. This was 1993, 94, 95, about that time period. And NPR had never really had a correspondent in Delhi, and I had never been to India, and I signed up for this assignment. It was either courageous or incredibly stupid, depending on how you look at it. But I landed in Delhi with, 2 trunks of all my belongings, a fax machine, which I used to send my radio scripts, and found an apartment in a little neighborhood called Nizamuddin in Delhi. And I set up shop, and I had this entire country of, at the time, nearly 1 billion people to report on. And it was the best years of my life, I have to say. It was India was just opening up to the world economically. It was sort of on the cusp between old India and new India. It was a wonderful time to be there, and it changed my life for the better.
A couple of memories, and by the way, for those who haven't spent time in Delhi or that part of India, you said you were in Nizamuddin. Great place for food, and after that, you must have found the East 6th Street restaurants not as good.
That's true. Even just a bad restaurant in India is better than a good Indian restaurant in New York, unfortunately. I mean, it was. I think the way I like to think of India is that you go stand on any street corner and you turn around 360 degrees in any Indian city, and you will see the best and the worst of humanity. The range of possibilities, good and bad, I think is greater in India than anywhere else. And I sort of fell in love with the writings and the ideas of Gandhiji, and I read almost everything he wrote, and I read about him, and I went to his ashrams, and I was not a devotee, I would say. I had my eyes open to his flaws. He was by no means a saint, but I just found his ideas very compelling. And this was the first real opportunity in this book, the one off of your left shoulder there, that I had to write about him directly. And I felt like it was sort of like a lifetime's worth of thinking and reading about Gandhi, sort of condensed into this one chapter in the book. He was one of my 14 philosophers. And many people, in fact, would not consider him a philosopher. It's not the first thing that comes to mind, right? They think of him as a political leader, a national hero, all kinds of things. But I think he definitely was a philosopher, but his domain was action. He said this many times, that, he famously said, "My life is my message." That if you want to know what Gandhi's philosophy was, you don't have to read him so much as watch him, what he did.
Yeah. I love the dedication here, or the quote: "Sooner or later, life makes philosophers of us all." Maurice Riesling.
Yeah.
Riesling.
And it's true. Riesling. And it's true that
wine, by the way, you know that.
Yeah. That, even if you've never considered yourself a philosopher or having a philosophical bone in your body, chances are sometime in the last 6 months, you've asked questions that you haven't before. And they're not just questions like, did I wash my hands enough today? Not just questions like that, but questions like, am I leading the right life? Am I doing what I'm meant to be doing? Am I going to endure this? Because there's no end point. I think that humans are capable of enduring great suffering as long as they know that there's light at the end of the proverbial tunnel, and we haven't quite seen that yet. So it's during times like this that people turn to religion and they turn to science, and I think they should turn more to philosophy because there's a lot to it, much more than we think.
And it certainly helps us understand and sometimes make sense of everything that's happening around us. We've only been talking about the last 6 months. The next 65 days or so to the election is going to be such a mess. It's going to be so awful, not just for Americans, but because the repercussions of what happens here will affect the rest of our lives for sure, and our children's lives. And that's what we worry about. Charles Conan Carroll's watching with Mary in New Jersey, the great state of New Jersey. We have
Now you got it. The great state of New Jersey. Okay.
and Charles is one of our sponsors, so we're always happy to see him watch as well. And Debbie says, reviewed the Geography of Bliss for my book club when it came out. Great storytelling. And you can tell, everybody who's listening now can hear in Eric the great storytelling that's also there in the book. Alex is tagging his friends. Everybody do this, including he tagged Joe Rogan. So I hope he books you for his podcast.
If you really should. It's interesting. Let's talk for a second about radio and the spoken word. Can we? There's no agenda here, right, Sree? This is free form.
Yeah.
I love and I miss. I was at NPR for 15 years, and I miss that. I have to say, as much as I like my life now, I miss what we're doing now. This conversation. The spoken word. I narrate all my books. This will be the fourth book that I've narrated the audiobook. And I think that the popularity of podcasts and audiobooks really says something about how, as humans, we're really oral storytellers. Like we've been listening to stories and speaking them aloud for way longer than we've been reading them, right? Reading is only, a couple thousand years old, while oral storytelling is tens and tens of thousands of years old. And so there's something about the spoken word in the human voice that's very compelling.
Yeah, and you obviously, I think learning, having done radio makes you a better television and video person, because you
makes you a better writer too. It's made me a better writer because radio, the way NPR does it, it forces you to really get to the essence of an idea. Like you can't, if you're reading a book or a newspaper story, you can go back, you can hit the refresh page, whatever, go back to the previous page. But when you're listening to something, it's, you've got to hold the audience's attention in real time, and you have to remove anything extraneous and really get to the heart of the issue, what matters. And I really think working for NPR made me a better writer.
I love hearing that. I'm always asking my NPR friends that, did you always sound like this, or you sound like you are now? Well, what was your accent growing up? Where did you grow up? And did you have to adjust it, modulate it when you became an NPR correspondent?
There's a pill they give you on the first day. You swallow it, and then you start sounding like you're on NPR, and you start getting very mellow. Yeah. It's on the first day you work there. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, just a word for the spoken word, which I love.
I love that. Let's just read some of the chapter titles here because they're so interesting. How to get out of bed like Marcus Aurelius, how to wonder like Socrates, how to walk like Rousseau, how to see like Thoreau. And it just goes on, how to enjoy like Epicurus, how to fight like Gandhi. So I'm going to ask you about that in a second. How to be kind like Confucius, how to have no regrets like Nietzsche, and how to cope like so I don't even know.
Epictetus, the Stoic, Epictetus, yeah.
Epictetus, and how to die like Montaigne. So let's start with the Gandhi quote, how to fight like Gandhi.
Well, let me say for a second that the reason I organized the book that way is to keep it simple. Even though you may not know the names of all those philosophers, chances are you don't. You know what it means to struggle with questions like how to enjoy, how to fight, how to be kind. So I purposely tried to keep it focused on the practical and the simple, and to offer a hand to the reader and say, come with me. This is going to be painless. So yeah, Gandhi, how to fight like Gandhi. Are you surprised by the way I titled that chapter?
Yes, but I loved, once you read the chapter, you understand exactly why you called it that.
So I think Gandhi, all of these philosophers are misunderstood, by the way. Philosophers are like teenagers. No one really gets them, right? They're all misunderstood, and some are more misunderstood than others. I think Gandhi is among the more misunderstood because when people think of Gandhi today, they tend to picture this frail man who's very peaceful and a pacifist. And Gandhi was not a pacifist and was not frail. He, in fact, really abhorred the term pacifism. He thought there was nothing passive about his satyagraha or soul force. He thought it was very active and required great courage and great manliness. I was surprised how often in his writings the term manliness would appear. It was a big deal to him, but he defined it very differently from the sort of John Wayne way that we do. It for him, manliness was the courage required to die for a cause, but not to kill for it or to harm anyone for it. And he thought someone facing down overwhelming force persistently but non-violently, consistently non-violent, was the true hero. And so really Gandhi does teach us how to fight.
And did you wonder if you chose those words, how that would be received?
I mean, I wanted to be a little bit provocative, but truthfully provocative, and I stand by it. I mean, Gandhi would agree that he was all about fighting, but he was about fighting not enemies. He said he had no enemies; he only had adversaries, opponents. And of course, in our culture today, we tend to demonize our opponents and to turn them into enemies. Gandhi's goal was not to condemn, but to convert his opponents to his side, and to even go beyond a win-win outcome to sort of an outcome that where both sides are better off after fighting than they were before fighting, that they sort of have enlarged the pie while fighting over the pie. He was imperfect, and I'm sure there are people out there who will say, what about this and that crazy sex thing he did, or slept with his grandnieces to test his celibacy? You can look it up. It's all there, and it's all true. He was not perfect, and his ideas probably would not work everywhere. His nonviolent resistance, safe to say, would not have worked with Hitler, even though Gandhi thought it probably would. So he wasn't perfect, but he, like all the characters in my book, gave us a different way of looking at the world, a different way of looking at fighting. It's not all about overpowering your opponent and destroying them. There are other ways.
Well, I just love anytime I can talk about Gandhi, warts and all, I'm happy to.
Right.
And just 2 years ago, speaking of retrospective travel, you had another word for it. What did you call it? Was it that?
No, retrospective travel, maybe. Yeah.
Retro travel. So 2 years ago, at just before August of 2018, my wife and kids and I and our best friends, Andrew and May, we were able to travel to South Africa and go to his ashram in the Phoenix settlement in Durban and meet his granddaughter, Ila Gandhi. And I would ask anybody who has a minute to go onto my Facebook and put in Ila Gandhi and my name, and you can watch us walk through we did a Facebook Live from there as she talked about her grandfather and learning from at his knee. She became a great anti-apartheid freedom fighter. And she talks about the problems that he had and the issues and his outlook on life. And so this is not something that's hidden, but it's great to have a chance to talk about that. So thank you, Eric. I always love talking about Gandhi. Let's see, my mom's watching from Kerala. Hi, Mom. And give you a chance, Eric, to say something about Kerala. I hope you made it there.
Oh, yes. To Cochin, on the rice boats, a few other places in Kerala. Kerala has had a great reputation when I was there as sort of the most literate state in India. I don't know if that's still the case.
100% literate. Yep.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, Sree, but a state in India where women have a lot of power.
Yeah. The women, there have been women leaders for a long time, but also just in the structure of one of the dominant communities there, the Nair community, Nair, we're from that community. Everything is matrilineal. rather than
Right.
patrilineal, meaning things pass through the daughters. And so it's actually good to have daughters, unlike, in a lot of other parts of India where it can be, cases of female infanticide and all of that are very high. I'm sure you've done stories on all of those things.
Yeah. Right. Right.
But in Kerala, women are, there's still obviously lots of problems in any part. Women always bear a bigger burden and
Right.
face obstacles. But in Kerala, we're proud of a lot of things there. By the way, also, as you may remember, the world's first elected communist government. That sounds
Right.
like
I was going to say that it was always held up as sort of a success story for communism,
yeah.
because
Well,
it was elected government and extremely high literacy, and yeah.
yeah, and I mean, therefore, all the other parts of communism that have caused it to be a state that hasn't been as successful in certain areas, and that's why you see so many Keralites outside of Kerala, and
Yes.
working all over the world. And Ashok is also watching from Kerala, and he watches on a regular basis. Lotte says, "Now I'm reminded of my college days in Delhi. You both should come back to Bhutan, and I'll be happy to show you around." Thank you so much.
I think we should take him up on that.
That's,
You know.
yeah, I agree. I certainly
Uh,
agree. And Lotte says, "I can't believe, Sree, you and the great team pulled off 177 episodes. Kudos, great to see, learn from Eric Weiner always. And greetings from Bhutan and from New York." Don is watching. Hi, Eric. Congrats on
oh,
the books. On the book,
you,
sounds
do you
like
do you know everybody? I mean, these are like, I feel like all my friends are popping up here from around the world.
we love that. That's the
So I mean, can I ask you a question?
sure.
I mean, it must be strange for you. In a way, your world has shrunk during this pandemic to this. What's the perimeter, the dimensions
Eight
of your
square
room?
feet. 8 square feet.
8 square feet, right? You're in a little jail cell there, basically, with food passed under the door. But your world has also enlarged through this show. I mean, have you thought about that? I mean, and how do you deal with you're reaching people, your show is a success, it's in the middle of a pandemic, so your world has become both smaller and larger at the same time. Does that make your head explode, or how do you deal with that?
No, you're going to turn me into a philosopher and mellow me out
I
right now.
will before the show's over, I swear.
You will beat me into philosophy.
Right.
Well, first of all, that is beautifully put. Nothing less that I would expect from Eric to understand the conundrum and the opportunity that a lot of us are thinking about in times of peril. There's opportunity, and that's what I'm dealing with here. Many people know that I've been a chief digital officer at the Met, at Columbia, at the City of New York. I taught digital journalism for 20 plus years. And people have said to me, more than one, I said, "Aren't you happy that everything you said has come true about digital?" And I said, "Not at the expense of the end of the world, right? Not at that.
Right.
That is not worth it. For
Right.
my 17-year-old children to turn 17 with their parents in the small apartment, that is not what I would want. Not to have 180,000 Americans dead at a time of something that, sure, we would have lost tens of thousands of people, but everything's been made worse by technology, by leadership, by media, by all kinds of elements that we use to make the best in the world. In some cases, have brought out the worst in the world. And because of that, people are dying. Just look at masks and something simple about let's wear a mask, let's go out, and
And this is to go full circle to how we started the conversation. I think this is the difference between information, I would say, and wisdom, or knowledge and wisdom, is it's not really a lack of information that is the problem, right? We know what can contain the virus. We don't yet have the knowledge to create a vaccine, to stamp it out medically with a vaccine, but we know what works, and this information is readily available. But the wisdom which is required to make decisions like, should we all make sacrifices to protect the most vulnerable? Or do we think that the rights of the individual trump, so to speak, the rights of the group? I mean, these are philosophical questions. These are not scientific questions. And I know, I have great respect for Dr. Anthony Fauci and other scientists. But when people say we should follow the science, I absolutely agree. But when they say that the scientists are all that's required to get us through this, that's where I disagree. That we need moral leadership. We need people who can inspire us to make the wise choices. Because, scientists can't do that on their own. They can say wearing masks is good science. It'll reduce the number of infections. But to motivate people to be wise, that requires, Plato called them philosopher kings, maybe a philosopher president, a philosopher leader, someone whose leadership is grounded in something. Marcus Aurelius was a Roman emperor, one of the last good ones, as they say. And he ruled over a quarter of the world during a time of plague, not unlike ours. And he was deeply steeped in Stoic philosophy. And he wrestled with all these issues, and he led from a place of moral conviction. He was willing to change those convictions as he thought about them more, but he had a grounding. And I worry that, would we elect a philosopher president now, or would we consider them too, esoteric and not grounded enough? I would argue that we'd be pretty well off with a philosopher president.
I don't think we're going to have an immediate opportunity to find that out, unfortunately.
No, perhaps not.
Yeah, that's part of the adventure that we're all experiencing right now. We have a few minutes left, folks, with Eric Weiner, the author of the Socrates Express, Life Lessons from Dead Philosophers. I'm going to ask him for, towards the end, we're going to ask him for some more life lessons. We don't want him to give away the book, but certainly entice us. He's already told us so many great things. Vandana says, one of our producers, that one of my favorite facts is that Socrates never actually wrote anything.
She is correct. Socrates never wrote a single word. He did not publish, and he perished. And he did not trust the written word. He thought that the new invention at the time called the book was dangerous. Actually, that people's memories would deteriorate, and that the art of conversation would be diminished. And he was actually right about that. We have lost some of that. And he believed that philosophy was conducted in conversation, that what we're doing right now is philosophy. You don't need to write it down necessarily. Never wrote a single word.
And what did that say about his state of, I mean, he was obviously literate, obviously, but did people of his stature not write? How unusual was that?
No, people wrote. Plato and Aristotle after him wrote plenty. But he thought, and this is kind of actually a thread throughout philosophy, is while you think of philosophy as book-centric, that you get your head in books, lots of philosophers, including one named Schopenhauer, German guy from the 19th century, warned against excessive reading. Like, in other words, you're just taking in the ideas of others, and you're not really sitting with your own still small voice in your head. And we don't really think for ourselves. We're inundated with this bombardment of information online. It was in books in the time of Schopenhauer and Socrates. Now it's online. And so we have all these ideas and these so-called convictions, but are they really ours, or are they other people's ideas? And a lot of philosophers, even before the internet, have advocated tuning out, going offline, going off the grid for a while. And so the dangers of social media are not new. They're amplified, and they're exponentially on social media. But the fundamental problem of acquiring other people's ideas and misinformation. I mean, misinformation is centuries old.
And just a chance for me to plug tomorrow's book and tomorrow's guest, because nobody should read any other books. The most important book of all time we're discussing right now. And right. Eric's book, Eric, is the Socrates Express.
But after you finish that, after you finish my book, you can read your next guest's book.
No, but actually, our next guest is not an author.
Oh, okay.
Fighting disinformation. Her name is Melissa Ryan, and she has been fighting the intersection of politics, media, culture, helps people, policymakers, and institutions combat disinformation, extremism, and online toxicity. You can imagine how busy she is these days. And so we're delighted she's spending Friday night with us. Let's go back to our comments. There are lots of people checking in. Good evening from Long Island. Ashok is welcoming you to Kerala. Curry Row, as it's known in the East Village, for those who missed the early story, he went on a first date with his wife at a restaurant called Kismet. You cannot tell me that was a coincidence. You wanted to have a good story to tell one day on something called a podcast.
It was fated. Yeah, I had to marry her at that point.
No choice.
No choice.
And Sunny says, "Hello, Eric. Hi from Houston.
Hello, Sunny.
Texas. Have you been to Houston?"
Yes, I have. There's a large Indian population there for some reason. I don't understand. A lot of Bengalis in Houston. Who knows why?
And Don's in San Francisco. And Ashok says he just came back after being tested positive. They were in the first line treatment center for 10 days, tested negative, and on home quarantine for 7 days more. We're keeping well and good now. Good to hear that, Ashok. You were a regular viewer in the early days, and I know you were away for a bit. Glad to have you back. Vandana said, could use some kebabs from Nizamuddin. That's the neighborhood in Delhi where Eric lived.
Yeah. What was the name of that restaurant? Kareem's, if anyone remembers Kareem's.
Yes.
There we go.
Let's go. Let's go back. Lotte says, I'm reminded of my college days. He's talking about that. And Ashok says, the one good thing about Indians living in big cities like Delhi and Mumbai is that all people, whether extremely rich or poor, are happy in their own way and thinking. So that's a philosophical comment there. Sree Sreenivasan says, sir, what is your advice? Nationalism is relevant even now in the age of globalization. Please say something about Tagore's philosophy. We had an episode on Tagore several months ago with my friend Ishita Ganguly. So I won't ask you to philosophize about his philosophy if you're not familiar.
Well, I'll just say that I'm not familiar with him, and I would say that what I admire, just one little tidbit about Tagore that I admire, is how he always kept learning. He at the age of something like 65, he was a poet and an educator all his life. He suddenly took up painting and was a pretty darn good painter. And he never stopped learning and never stopped experimenting. And I think he was a great creative force. Also not perfect, and butted heads with Gandhi tremendously. The other question about nationalism, boy, I'm not sure where she was going with that. That's probably a whole nother hour we can talk about that.
Sriyarsha is a doctor, I gather, and says, what about the philosophy of not looking at the background of patients? I guess, should it matter who you're treating? I guess Sriyarsha is looking for some wisdom from you on that. Like, does it matter what the background of a patient is, or should you just look at the I'm expanding from that, but I'm kind of riffing on it.
Yeah, that's a tough question. I think you should learn about the background of the patient, and then it should not matter. You don't ignore it. You might need it to diagnose and treat, but it should not influence how you treat the patient.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of thinking. Let's see. So many comments here. I'm just trying to pick them because they're so. This is so cool that so many people are watching.
That's great.
Rose says that she and Vandana are tweeting live. Listen to you on NPR, and of course, I recognize your byline from the New York Times. So that's
going back a few years. Okay.
Lotte says, my best teacher from primary school in Bhutan, Annie Charles, is from Kerala. Wonderful to hear that. And my father, Sharmaji, Ashok says, was the political secretary to EMS in the world's first communist ministry. Again, that it's so hard to reconcile, especially the communism we know today in China and in Cuba, to think of elected democracy, but that can happen in Kerala. Mark is watching from Durham, North Carolina. Do you want to talk about the triangle and where you've been there?
I wrote a book before this one called The Geography of Genius, where I look at the connection between place and creativity, essentially. And the triangle down there is a pretty creative place. And Stanford and the whole Silicon Valley that has grown side by side with Stanford are pretty creative places as well. In that book, I have a chapter, I feel like I'm working for the Indian Chamber of Commerce here, but I have a chapter on Calcutta, as it was called back then, and the Bengal Renaissance in the 19th century, of which Tagore was at the forefront of. And and it was an incredible time. If you want to read about an incredible explosion of creativity, it's Calcutta in the 19th century. So yeah.
Mark says that we all know Socrates, Aristotle, and even American philosophers like Mark Twain. Who are some of your guests not as well-known philosophers?
Okay, in my book, for instance, I've got I've got a mix of people, right? Some you will know, like Socrates, Nietzsche, I guess most people know. But people don't think of Gandhi as a philosopher. He's in there. I have an 11th century Japanese woman writer named Sei Shonagon, who wrote an odd and fascinating little book called The Pillow Book. And her chapter is How to See Beauty in the Small. And she had an incredible eye for detail and really taught me, and I hope will teach the readers, how we often overlook the small, don't take it seriously, diminish it. And there's great beauty to be found there. And Simone de Beauvoir is also in the book, and a lesser known French philosopher named Simone Weil, and a whole bunch of people.
Amazing. Steve is talking to Rajan, saying, was talking with my daughter about this today. And Yogesh asks, what about Buddha?
Yeah, it's hard to draw a line, particularly in South Asia, between philosophy and religion, because there really is no line, as you know. And so, was the Buddha a philosopher or was he a religious figure? I'd probably put him in the religious figure category, even though it's a religion founded on a philosophy, really. So I had to make some tough choices not to include Buddha in this book.
Mark
He
says,
gets plenty of airtime. Don't worry, he's good.
Mark says, hasn't modern media created a bunch of pop philosophers? I think of folks like Elena Van Zandt, T.D. Jakes, and others.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about this. On the one hand, you don't want to water down philosophy to the point of diluting it beyond recognition. On the other hand, if pop stands for popularizing, I'm all for it, right? I want to actually popularize philosophy in a good way. That's the point of my book. This is not a book for philosophy majors, although if you majored in philosophy, you may very well enjoy it and learn something. But it's a book about philosophy for people who would never pick up a book on philosophy. So it's tricky. I think popularizing need not be negative. It can be a good thing.
Okay, Mark, you've set off a little fight in the a little, or at least agreement, where Twyla says, Mark Lee, they're not philosophers, and Mark says they're kind of my point. They coach themselves as modern day philosophers. They couch themselves.
Yeah. It's I'm trying not to get too hung up on titles, because like we're all potential philosophers, I would say, if we're not all philosophers. And okay, yeah, there's definitely a little feud going on there. I'm sorry if I caused that problem, but the problem is when we say, oh, he's a philosopher, she's not a philosopher, we end up excluding people from the conversation, and I don't want to do that. It is different from like who's a doctor and who's not a doctor. I don't want someone operating on me because they say they're a doctor, but I'd like everyone to try philosophy. And it's sort of a way of life. If you live and think like a philosopher, you're a philosopher. You don't need a PhD to be a philosopher.
Of course, PhD is something that very closely associated with philosophy, and
Right. In the original sense of the word, I think. But yeah, a
Mark,
lover of wisdom.
Right. One of the things I loved about Marquette education, so we studied Marquette University, was we were required to take 21 hours in philosophy and theology. It was part of our Jesuit education. So it was a second minor for every student. Do you know other places that force folks
well, I know in France, nationwide, all high school students are required to take a semester of philosophy before they can graduate.
Wow.
Now, why don't we do that in the US? I don't know. I think we should, given all the other courses that are requirements for graduation. I think one semester of philosophy would be a brilliant idea.
So it sounds like we need to get you to Marquette, because they're certainly talking about this.
Yeah, I mean, I think hopefully it's taught in a way that makes it accessible and as an invitation to more learning.
Sure. Subbalakshmi says Tagore Shantiniketan is another place in India one must visit. I've never been, and I do want to.
I have been there, and it is still peaceful. And so Shantiniketan was Tagore's experiment in education. He started his school. It was like the unschool, basically. He was going to approach education from a radically different perspective, and it's still a university today, and you can still visit it.
And Ashok says he's subscribed to your newsletter. So let's give a
yes.
Your newsletter.
I have a newsletter. I call it my Atlas of Ideas, and I call it that because that sort of sums up my approach to writing and life and what I do. It's an Atlas of Ideas. I write at the intersection of place and ideas. So we haven't talked about this much, but in this book, it's called the Socrates Express for a reason. I take trains everywhere, and I travel. So I go to the village in Switzerland where Nietzsche did a lot of his thinking. I go to Birla House in Delhi where Gandhi lived and was assassinated. I go to Stoic Camp in Wyoming. I go to Schopenhauer's hangouts in Frankfurt. So I'm kind of an odd duck in that I write about these two, in a way, bring together these two disparate worlds of travel writing and philosophy, place and ideas. So my newsletter is called My Atlas of Ideas, and I try to each month bring people some fresh ideas about how to think about this intersection.
By the way, what a brilliant idea to have a monthly newsletter instead of a weekly.
I almost didn't say monthly because I thought it sounded kind of lame. Because I think you must have an hourly newsletter, Sree, because you're like just so like you probably have sent out a newsletter during this show. You're so prolific in a social media way. So how do you do it? Like how did you get into this space?
Well, who's interviewing you? Who here? But
sorry, it's old habits die hard. I can't help it.
You're very kind. I would just say that it really helps to have awesome colleagues and an awesome family. You need both in today's world. It takes a village and a village idiot to make it. And so we.
Okay. But you seem to have a natural affinity for making these connections and reaching people, and I applaud it seriously. It is a talent, it's a skill.
It means a lot. Everyone go to ericweinerbooks.com and the newsletter tab, and you can download and sign up for the newsletter. Vandana says Tagore's nationalism is brilliant and so relevant today. And Subbalakshmi recommends Ramakrishna, another Indian philosopher.
Yes.
And mystic. Ashok says small is always beautiful. And Jonathan is praising the Pillow Book is a key to Japanese aesthetics. And we know Steve,
and that's what that's what I write about. If you want to understand the iPhone, read the Pillow Book or read my encounter with the Pillow Book. And that's the way I like to think of my relationship with these philosophers. I encounter them, and they're fully formed human beings. They're imperfect, as Gandhi was. They're struggling like we are with the meaning of life. None of these people were saints. They didn't have all the answers. They just wrestled with the questions a little more courageously and heroically than most of us do. But we can be like them as well.
We don't have a lot of time left, but this is as soon as rebirth is introduced into a question.
Oh, I like rebirth. Yes.
Yeah.
Heidegger. Okay, we'll skip over Heidegger and his skeletons in his closet and the end of philosophy. No, it's not the end of philosophy. Plato once said, what is cherished in a country is cultivated there. And if we cherish classical music, we'll have lots of great classical composers. If we cherish pop music, we'll have lots of pop musicians. And if we cherish philosophy, we will have lots of great philosophers. Philosophy is not dead. It's gone to sleep for a little while. It's sleeping. It's not dead. If you read my book, you'll help wake it up and wake yourself up in the process.
Our other producer, Rose Horowitz, says, reading Socrates, Aristotle, St. Augustine, Schopenhauer changed my life in college. I miss reading and talking about ideas. This is great fun.
Good. Thank you, Rose. And I feel like we need to make time for sitting down like this, wrestling with the big issues of life, the practical issues of how to live. And we're so busy. I mean, a lot of, I sort of say in the book at one point that good philosophy is slow philosophy. And I think that's true. And it's slowing down is sort of a prerequisite for doing philosophy. And we're moving too fast. Even in a pandemic, we seem to be both stuck and moving too fast at the same time. I don't know how we do it.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
Rose says, I see you profile some women in your book, but doesn't this book reinforce the prevalence of Western culture? Could there be a sequel?
There can always be a sequel. And you're right that most of philosophy is associated with Western philosophy, but I do have Gandhi in there, who was not Western, and Seishonagan and Confucius. The West does not have a monopoly on wisdom by any means. And yeah, absolutely, there could be a book that featured only Eastern philosophers or African philosophers,
or women only, right?
or women only.
Saoirse says, please visit Belur once. And George says, University of Chicago undergrad, 2 years of great books, base general studies, taught by great philosophers, required for a BA. That's true. Even Columbia has a very famous
core curriculum, the CC, I believe it's called. Yeah.
Yeah. And Vandana has put in a link to the newsletter. And
Thank you.
Says, great show, and thanks for making my day. He's up early. It's 7 a.m. now in India. And
thanks for getting up, Ashok.
And Rose is quoting you, talking about me. And I missed some of this, so we'll catch the replay. Thank you, Eric Weiner, Sree, Rose, and Vandana. And Jonathan says, great show, useful in the search for the good, the true, and the beautiful. Thank you.
No, I like that phrasing, the good. Can I borrow that, Jonathan? Ask him. Because I like that the good, the true, and the beautiful. And that's sort of a recurring theme in my book, is the good, the true, and the beautiful. Seeing unexpected beauty, seeing the world a bit differently. And, we think of philosophy as maybe the search for truth or an analytical way of looking at the world. But really, it's an exercise in seeing the world otherwise, seeing it a bit differently. The way you read a
Rose
good
novel.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, Rose says, I have to look at the Pillow book. Sounds fascinating. You were saying about a good novel?
When you read a good novel, when you put it down, the world looks fresher, different to you for several days afterwards sometimes. And good philosophy has that same effect. You read it, and then afterwards you start to see things a bit differently.
We have someone writing in, I wish philosophy was required in college. Thanks. And if you already graduated from college, buy the book. If you're still in college, buy the book. And it's called...
I think philosophy will be required by the end of the show, because we seem to have a quorum of people who are like, yes, let's require it. Yeah. I saw practical philosophy. Yes, there are various attempts out there. Elaine de Botton, fellow author, has a School of Life out of London and other cities. And I would say that there is, and of course this isn't only me, there is a kind of a renaissance of philosophy that's taking place. Stoicism in particular, we haven't talked much about that, but it's an ancient Greek and Roman philosophy, and it has a huge following now, particularly in Silicon Valley. It's Stoicism in particular is making something of a comeback.
Well, that's part of all the stuff that so much we have to learn. Like, that's one of the things we've learned in the pandemic. Jonathan saying you love the Pillow book, and Mark says there were some great philosophers in Native American culture and African countries. Yogesh is pointing out that Gandhi believed in the caste system. He did. We've said multiple times that Gandhi was not perfect.
This is where it gets tricky, and this is a whole nother show. We could talk about cancel culture and everything that's going on. But what do you do with someone from the past who had a lot of great ideas and some really bad ideas? Do you keep the good ones and throw away the bad ones, or do you cancel the whole person? That's a whole nother subject.
And same thing about artists who were good at their art, but when you look at the man, in cases behind the art, there are some issues. Shirsa says, what about Swami Vivekananda? I think you're going to hear about every famous Indian, and you're going to be responsible for not putting them in your book.
Vivekananda, he was the guy who came to Chicago, right? And brought the whole idea of Hinduism and Indian religion was it 1893 to the Chicago World's Fair. There was a Parliament of World Religions, and he's a fascinating character.
He absolutely is. Well, I'm going to let you go, Eric. I told you we'd do about 45 minutes. Here we are, almost 90 minutes into our
We
time.
could keep going for 3 more days.
Lotte says, thank you. Thank you, Eric and Sree and team, for this wonderful storytelling and learning opportunity. Best wishes and a good weekend. And Rose says, Jonathan's comment on how philosophy looks at the good, the true, and the beautiful makes me think of Plato's forms. However, in poetry, there is always philosophy, no?
Ooh, that's another hour conversation. Maybe in good poetry, you put philosophy aside for a minute and you simply dwell in the beauty of the moment. There's kind of a philosophy of no philosophy, that there's a time to actually stop thinking entirely and appreciate, say, a piece of classical music or a beautiful poem, and that even operates on a different level.
I'll let you go by just
Okay.
asking you about the elections and what should we be thinking about with the, in my mind, the terrible situation we're going to face just in the run up to the election, what's going to happen afterward, no matter who wins and all of that. What is a philosopher's approach to this?
You have to really decide what matters to you and what doesn't. You want to know that the big things are big and the small things are small, and know the difference between the two. So I think it's a time for clarity, and without endorsing one candidate or another, just ask yourself what matters to you, what qualities in the person matters to you, and because they're not just personal qualities, right? They represent something that will be carried on into policy and into our lives. So it's a really simple question of what matters to you, and you may decide that it's the way that a candidate's hair color. And I doubt that, though. You're probably, if you stop for 2 seconds, you're going to decide it's not that, it's something else. But what is that something? And can you articulate what matters? And once you do, and you get clarity on this is what Socrates, bring it right back to Socrates. He thought that once you really know something, then your choices become much more obvious. Like once you know what courage really is, you'll become courageous. So once you know what the choice is in this election, what really matters, the choice will become clear. Is that too philosophical of an answer? Perhaps a little.
I think it's a great answer and something that a lot of us will be thinking about as we are trying to understand everything that's going on. And it's so difficult, I think, to understand all that's happening. And so you're giving us lots of advice and wisdom here. Mark says, great conversation. Just have to bring Eric back soon. So
I would agree. I'll end on this, that one definition of what we're doing here, this kind of philosophical discourse, is enlightened kibitzing, to use the Yiddish word. And I feel like that's what we've engaged in, enlightened kibitzing. Maybe there's a Malayalam term for that. I don't know. But, and lots of cultures have it, but it's great. It's great. I really enjoyed this.
thank you. And everyone, please follow Eric on Twitter. Is Eric_Weiner on Twitter, ericweinerbooks.com, and check out his book. I know Eric, it couldn't have been well done. Nice.
Very subtle. Very subtle.
No, you've got to do it. I make all my authors hold their books up. There you go. One thing I would say to you, I know it's not easy trying to publish a book in a pandemic. People are distracted, but you also have an opportunity to have conversations with people you otherwise may not have had and reach people that way too. So we wish you the very best always. Eric Weiner has been my guest. I'm going to put one of the things we do on the show, Eric, is to bring back the reintroduce guests, because people tune in kind of in the middle of the evening. They're not sure exactly what's going on. So I'm going to reintroduce you here, but say goodbye. And thank you, Eric.
Thank you so much, Sree. This was a real pleasure. Take care.
Our guest was Eric Weiner, the author of the Socrates Express, In Search of Life's Lessons from Dead Philosophers, best-selling author of the Geography of Bliss. His books have been translated into more than 20 languages, especially the languages of Bulgaria and Indonesia. And he is also a former New York Times writer for more than 10 years, a business reporter, among other things. And at NPR, he was the first Indian correspondent for NPR, India-based correspondent for NPR. Thank you very much. This brings us to the end of another show. But before we go, one of the things I asked the amazing Columbia Law School professor, Kimberly Crenshaw, how can we be allies of the Black community? And she said very simply, say their names. So I'm going to do that right now. Our friend Rahajan pulled together a list of names and asked us to read it. And so I'm going to do that with you right now. It's a chance for me to do what Kimberly asked, which is to share their names. And it's a long list. So what we're going to do is look back on, every day we're going to do a small section of the list. And this is the tragedy, that the list is so long. And I'm very grateful to Rahajan for pulling this list together and helping us to understand these names and have them here. So let me pull that up so you can see it. And these are the say their names list that he put together for 9-2. So let me see if I can blow this up a little bit, and you can all see it. So I will read this note and read these names. These are names of people who've been killed by police, shot by police, and killed by white supremacists in this country. So let us read the names. Dijon Kizzy, Damian Daniels, Anthony Huber, and Joseph Rosenbaum, killed by white supremacists on August 25th. Jacob Blake, shot by police, still with us. Vice President Biden met with him. Danny Buckley, Trayford Pellerin, Andres Guardado, David McAtee, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Michael Dean, Tatiana Jefferson, Elijah McClain, Botham Jean, Antoine Rose II, 17 years old, Danny Ray Thomas, Stephon Clark, Anthony Weber, age 16, Heather Heyer, killed by a white supremacist, as you may remember, in Charlottesville, Aaron Bailey, Keenan King and Anthony Holmes Garriquez, Charlena Siobhan Lyles, Tommy Lee, Jordan Edwards. And this is story close to home, as you can imagine. For one of the names is Srinivasa Kuchibotla and Ashok Madasani, shot by white supremacists on February 22nd, 2017. Quinice Hayes, Chad Robertson, Muhammad Muhaim Jr., Terrence Crutcher, Larnell Bruce, Corin Gaines, Joseph Mann, Philando Castile, Alton Sterling, Kaylin Rockmore, Janet Wilson. And I'm going to pause there because this list will keep going, and we want to read a portion of those names every day on this show. And thank you to Rahajan for putting that together. Imagine that list. Imagine that a list exists like that. And I always like to show this cover story of Time magazine, a painting by Titus Kaffer. You see a mother with a child snatched from her, the blue glove of the pandemic. And on the right, a photo that many people have not seen before it was published in Time magazine. You're seeing a young Larcinia Floyd and her son George. Larcinia would die 2 years to almost the day that he would be killed, and they are now buried together in Houston. He was killed, of course, murdered on video in Minneapolis. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for your support of this show. Thank you for your guest ideas. Thank you for suggesting yourselves as guests. We would love to have you on our show. We have great guests and topics all the time. We're always looking for more. We have tomorrow night, Fighting Disinformation. Melissa Ryan, an expert on extremism, disinformation, and online toxicity, will be our guest. On Saturday morning, we have a guest who will talk about schools reopening from a child psychiatrist and child psychologist point of view. On Monday, we have the author Janine Guerrero, who is the author of a book called Hate Monger about Stephen Miller. So you don't want to miss that. That's on Monday night at 9 p.m. Thank you, as always, for your support of this show. Thank you to our sponsors. A big shout out to them. We're always grateful to them for their support. She's on Call. Make sure you watch the new episode Sunday at 11. This week, we're doing a best of episode, so check that out. And we're also grateful to our friends at Rise or Fall Together, the One Shared World Interdependence Summit, Thursday, September 17th, 9 to noon Eastern Time, oneshared.world, a free conference with some world famous speakers. We're also grateful to Charles Conan Carroll and his book, The Inventor in You, a step-by-step guide to your first invention. Charles is the developer of more than 80 patents at Inventor Charles and his website, guidetoinvention.com. And a big thank you to Muckrack Academy and its Fundamentals of Social Media, free certification now available, mrac.co/social, mrac.co/social. And finally, to nonbelievable.com, divinely delicious cookies on a mission. Each handcrafted cookie provides a meal to those in need. One cookie equals one meal. Thanks so much, everybody. Thank you for being here. One other way that you can help out the show is to subscribe to us on YouTube, youtube.com/SreeNet. Please grab that and follow, please. And I want to tell you about this QR code. It is an alert for whenever I'm live. It's not a WhatsApp group. It's a gentle WhatsApp alert. Just hold up your phone and you'll know when we are alive. Otherwise, follow me on Facebook and on Twitter at Sree, and on LinkedIn. We're live on all those platforms. Check out the Socrates Express from Eric Weiner. We're so grateful to everybody for being here, all your support. We are so grateful. See you again onwards to episode 180, 6 months in a row of episodes on this show.